Hey everybody, welcome back to theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Again, it's theclinicaltrialsguru.com. I am joined by Darshan Kulkarni. He is a guest guru on the show. He's also one of our producers. So thank you very much, Darshan. He goes by the Twitter handle FDA Lawyers. He's got a bunch of other profiles everywhere else on social media. YouTube channel. Are you still updating your YouTube channel?
Not as much. I probably should start doing that again after. I need to learn from the great Dr. Safara, or Mr.
Ah,
Safara.
yes, not to be confused with Dr. Sfera, as often is the case. All right, well, for those of you guys who don't know Darshan, maybe you're a new viewer, he's a regular guest on the show. He's an attorney, he's also a pharmacist,
Mhm.
and he doesn't specialize in pharma law, but he focuses heavily on pharma law, right?
Yeah, I'm
Legal
not allowed to.
disclaimer.
For legal reason, not allowed to say specialize.
No specialization, but definitely knowledgeable. And he's got the interesting perspective of being a pharmacist as well as an attorney, so he understands the regulations, the regulatory environment that we all play in, and he also understands a lot of the science behind the clinical trials that we're involved in. So it's a very unique uh, individual here. And he's also an educator, an author, a blogger. Where's your
Speaker.
speaker? Yeah, you speak everywhere.
I speak. Yeah, I've started doing global talks now.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've got to get into myself. I will follow your lead there. So thank you, Darshan.
Thank you.
And
Uh,
guys, please don't take this as legal advice, anything here, okay?
Thank you. I
It's
appreciate
actually
that.
the opposite of legal advice, right?
That is probably true.
All right, so let's get right into this podcast. We're kind of going to cover a few topics, a
Yeah.
wide variety of topics, however, so they're not really related. The first one I wanted to talk about was investigator initiated studies, because I'm working with a few people who are doing kind of investigator initiated trials. I don't know if you can call it that, or what would even what would define an investigator initiated trial versus just a small startup with one investigator doing a study. And I guess that'd be a good topic to start talking about there, Sean.
Yeah, so I mean, investigator-initiated studies, for the most part, as you know, came out of a lot of large academic hospitals, all wanting to do research. However, with the cost of drugs going up, sometimes it said these academicians said, you know what, we might be able to put in our time for free, and we might be able to recruit for free, but we can't afford the cost of these drugs, or we just might need some additional support from a pharmaceutical or biopharmaceutical or medical device company. So what you got were these investigator-initiated studies. And the idea was these companies would either give you drugs, they'd give you some additional assistance, maybe like statistical support, maybe some medical writing at the end. But the big question was, if you're doing all this, when does it stop being a investigator-initiated study, and when does it start being a sponsor-supported
Right,
study?
right.
The big question that comes out of that also is the idea that, okay, we're now doing a quote unquote investigator initiated study. Um, is there control? And who's the sponsor? Because the FDA, if you look at the FDA guidances, they have different ways they define the word sponsor. You've got the person who provides the drug is the sponsor, the person who is listed on the NDA is the sponsor, the person
Hmm.
who provides financial support is the sponsor, the person who is listed as the sponsor is the sponsor. So in many cases, in things like investigator-initiated studies, the investigator is deemed to be the sponsor. However, the sponsor still has several responsibilities as we traditionally think of them. So the pharmaceutical company may have certain responsibilities. So it's critical, if you are the sponsor or if you are a CRO managing an investigator-initiated study, that you clarify what those roles are and who's responsible for what role.
Hmm.
There was a discussion. I was just at Magi last week. There was a discussion about quality agreements. So it may make sense when you're doing these quality agreements to decide who's going to play what role and how is that going to happen. So delegation of responsibilities starts becoming really critical.
And what is
Uh,
a quality agreement for the people out there who don't know?
so the quality agreement, the big thing, it's almost like a supportive document to a CTA, to a clinical trial agreement, and it talks about the delegation of responsibilities. It talks about whose SOPs will be used, how will they be used, how will you ensure quality is maintained throughout your facility.
And this
Uh,
document is meant for the FDA to review, right?
so that's exactly right. So the idea is a quality agreement. A CTA technically, now there are arguments out there, and there are portions of the CTA which don't meet this criteria. But the FDA is responsible for looking at quality in your system to ensure that your clinical trials are done with the purpose of with the idea of quality. So the FDA talks about these principles like quality by design and all that good stuff. Technically, a CTA doesn't really look at quality in the same way. They say you will adhere to good clinical practices. They say you will adhere to EU CGCP or whatever
Right.
criteria you use. Um, but they don't really talk about how that will happen. A quality agreement theoretically should be getting into that more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And the FDA is starting to push a little bit towards that. They're asking to see these. So, but the point I was trying to make was with the CTA, the FDA technically may not have the right to look at a CTA. Because if it doesn't get into quality, why is the FDA looking at it? In fact, if the FDA is looking for your CTA, I would start asking the question about why and should I give them access to that? Because often the FDA in those situations is looking at what kind of fines can I levy against this company.
Right, yeah. One of the first rules of an audit, an FDA audit, is don't leave your contract in the reg binder.
Right.
Every monitor will tell every site this. Don't leave your contract in the reg binder, because if it's there, the FDA, should you have an audit, the FDA will look at it. But they're not supposed to look at it, but if it's there, they will look at it. So that's generally the rule, right?
Right. Basically, I make the rule a little bit more general than even that. I would say don't give them reg binders in general. Give them specifically what they're asking for. We're talking
Specific documents.
right, specific documents. Don't just go, oh, you wanted to do this study. Well, here's everything that goes with that study. Let the FDA ask for what they're looking for and be cooperative. I'm not saying don't be cooperative. Just give them documents that they're looking for. Don't be volunteering information.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've always said, and I think most people would agree, the FDA tends to give you enough rope to hang yourself by.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just one of those situations where you're handing them a little too much rope.
Yeah.
Uh,
Now let's talk about back to the investigator-initiated trial
yeah,
before we move on
yeah,
to another topic. We understand that IRBs are required for any trial, right?
right.
Okay, now, when do you need to notify, or are there ever cases where you don't need to notify the FDA that you're doing a trial? I know you need to register it on clinicaltrials.gov, right? Or am I wrong there?
Absolutely, you do. In fact, that's one of the problems that you have. A lot of investigator-initiated studies don't think that they do. But if they meet the criteria of clinicaltrials.gov, they should be registering. In fact, if you look at clinicaltrials.gov, it comes out and says that, what is it, 70% of most studies are not registered at clinicaltrials.gov when they should be.
Right.
So most people assume that that's from academic sites and from investigator-initiated studies.
And they were supposed to be cracking down on that when the FDA took over
Correct.
clinicaltrials.gov.
Very good.
Now,
Absolutely.
what's the minimum requirement for putting a study on clinicaltrials.gov?
It's again, I'd have to look at the criteria all over again, but it comes down to everything that's post phase one, all the way through into phase four, and then there are specific requirements that go into it. So
Hmm.
BAB studies, I need to look at if they need to be included or not.
So even if you
But
have a trial with one subject, one study
absolutely
participant.
doesn't matter.
Now, what if
Uh,
you're doing this trial on yourself? You're the subject, and you're the investigator,
well, my first question is, why are you doing a study on yourself?
because they're
What kind
crazy.
of data can you get?
Who knows?
Oh, then maybe that's a seeding trial. Are you bribing yourself?
Aha.
No, you can't get any valuable study. It's not a study at that point. That's just a analysis.
Self-experimentation.
And that's a whole other level of. Um,
Well, because some people might be thinking of ways to go around
but is that
reporting
a
to the
study then?
FDA. I don't know. Probably
I'm
not.
not sure the FDA would classify that as a study if you're doing it on one person. I think most IRBs would consider that to be unethical.
Oh, just doing it on one person?
Yeah, I mean, you can't get any real results out of it.
I see.
Having
And
said that, that's different from clinical practice, which is exactly what you're doing. You're doing one by one, case study by case study.
right, right.
But I'm not sure that constitutes a study.
Now, what about 10 subjects? Is that more?
Still get any data out of it? 10 subjects? You can for BAB purposes, but I'm not sure you
Hmm.
can actually correlate that to much more than here's what we tend to see as plasma levels.
I see.
But having said that, if you do bridging studies, when you go to certain countries, they insist that you do studies on like 40 patients. And most people in the world of clinical trials, as you know, go, well, 40 patients, I'm not sure what data I can get out of that.
Right.
And most clinicians agree that that tends to be rather useless. But the reason it's done is because, at least the logic that these countries use is we want to see if your drug that you say works in all these other patient populations works in our patient population.
Now, what if
an employment scheme?
What if you're not doing a drug, but you're doing like a biomarker or analyzing someone's genotype? Is there a limit of? Is there a minimum?
It's not. Again, it's sort of based the way we've always discussed it. Statistically, can you use this to make generalizations about your studies?
Right.
If with 10 people you can make generalizations, go ahead, but I'm not sure you could. Does it? For example, certain things, even 3,000 people may not be enough. There were certain studies that required 60,000 patients, as you may have known.
Right.
So if you would have said, well, maybe I can just use 10,000 patients, you probably didn't get good data out of it. And that's a lot of patients. So it's not the number, it's the statistical evaluation you're trying to get. And the information that you're trying to get, it may not be enough.
All right, so without giving legal advice, let's say you're doing an investigator-initiated trial. You, I would imagine, upload something to clinicaltrials.gov, right?
Yeah.
And then do you need to...
That's the first question. Who's responsible for uploading to clinicaltrials.gov?
Right.
Are you the investigator doing it? Or are you going to expect the sponsor to do it? Because they have the support, and you have to meet those criteria.
And can anyone just upload anything on clinicaltrials.gov? Do you need a password or?
You have to create an account to do that.
You create an account, okay.
You have to create an account. You have to register yourself.
So you and I can create an account today and upload something tomorrow.
Theoretically.
It might be removed, and we might get fined, but right?
But theoretically, it's possible.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of people out there that are interested in these investigator-initiated trials, so that's why I'm asking these questions.
Yeah, I haven't done the mechanics of actually uploading the data. Most people don't pay lawyers to do that kind of work.
Right.
But I've done presentations and I've done talks and I've done like assisted with clinicaltrials.gov, but it's around the advice area and strategy. What can you say? What must you say? That kind of stuff. And
what I've learned is that the IRBs, especially some of these smaller ones, they usually have a team of people that can help with these submission processes.
Yeah, there are a couple of organizations that are coming up that are trying to do that. I'm not sure an IRB is necessarily the right set of people to...
Usually it's a CRO, but if they can't afford a CRO...
Maybe. I'm not sure it's necessarily the IRB itself. Maybe it's a division of the IRB. Because I would imagine the IRB needs to stay separate from those portions unless they're sort of saying, we want you to adhere to these standards, and if that means we have to help you do it, we'll help you do it, but this is what we expect you to do it.
Yeah, that's more the case, at least from my experiences, my limited experiences. All right, enough with that one. We've exhausted it to death, and we've given you guys so much free information here. But give me or Darshan a call if you need help. We'll help you out.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
All right, what else, Darshan? Doofah. No, I did not sneeze. That is an acronym. Thank you.
Doofah is the Generic Drug User Fee Act. And it's one of those things that came out a few years ago. So in the 1990s, something called PDUFA came out, and the idea was that pharmaceutical companies were complaining that the FDA takes way too long to review an application. So the FDA said, well, we just don't have the manpower to do it. We don't have the manpower to review every single drug application as quickly as you'd like us to. So PDUFA was born. PDUFA is the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. And what that said was, you pharmaceutical company pay us X amount of money for every NDA or BLA or whatever it is that you're going to submit. In exchange, we promise to review it within X amount of time. And I have to look at the details. I think it's like 90% of all applications within 1 year or something like that. So that is pretty valuable to drug companies. So they said, fine, we'll do it. What you then got, and we're on version 5, I think, PDUFA 5. It's been a very, very successful program. The FDA has made a ton of money with it. And the FDA's jurisdiction has just kept increasing. One of the big areas, as you know, has been the concept of drug shortages and how they've been going after all these drug shortages in India because of bad manufacturing practices and the like. They weren't, well, not bad manufacturing practices as much as not adhering to good manufacturing practices.
Right.
That's a legal distinction. Um, and when you had that situation, the FDA finally came out and said, you know what, we think that there are now too many drug companies for generic drug companies for us to keep doing this. We just don't have the money to go to all these places across the world and keep reviewing them for free. So GDUFA was born, and GDUFA basically required that generic drug companies pay the FDA a fee, and the FDA will go out and look at these facilities and ensure that they meet quality standards.
Hmm.
Uh, one of the air so you ask all this, and the big question is, well, how does any of this relate to clinical trials?
Right. To research clinics.
Right. The big thing that came out is that there's a portion of GDUFA that requires self-identification. So a portion of GDUFA says that if you're doing bioequivalency and bioavailability studies, you need to still register with the FDA. And this is a bit of a surprise because I've been to several conferences recently and no one's talked about it. The question is, when do you need to register under GDUFA? The language that the FDA uses can be problematic.
Hmm.
So you need to see if you meet the criteria. So several sites may meet the criteria of registering under GDUFA. So it makes sense to take a look at it, see if you meet those criteria, and register.
If I would imagine if you do a X amount of bioequivalent studies a year, something
No,
like
it's
that,
not
right?
actually based on numbers or anything. It's
Ah.
based on if you do bioequivalency studies and what the word testing means. And if you meet, for example, if you do bioanalytical testing, you may meet those criteria. But the question is, do you actually do bioanalytical testing? And there's a pretty good argument out there that you probably don't. On the other hand, what if you actually do administration of drugs? Then you probably do, and that's one of the FDA defines all of that. People who either administer drug or manage drugs to be part of CROs.
Hmm.
So if they are part of the CROs, you might have to register. So again, you have to
And
see if you.
drug meaning including investigational product or just generic?
Well, they're referencing this in the context of uh, generic drugs. So it would be, again, it's self-registration. You aren't required,
Right.
uh, but it's sort of in the idea that the FDA wants you to do that.
And I'm
So
sure if it becomes a requirement or a strong recommendation,
it's a strong recommendation already. It's very strong.
okay, then most of the CROs, when they get the sites to participate in the trials, will have that document or whatever as part of the submission process or the
Right.
regulatory startup
Basic,
packet.
and that's the logic. The criteria is, are you being named on the ANDA or on the NDA, and
Oh,
if you're
okay.
administering. So it really comes down to, are you part of that packet?
Ah, so it's going to get more complex, this industry, as we go forward now.
Yeah, I've had clients deal with it, and they've been complaining that the process itself, the technology behind it, is really bad. So it's like a 30-step process to
Wow.
register, and it's not intuitive at all. It's like turn off Java, then turn on Java, then register, but then turn it off again, and it's crazy apparently. I might have to, depending on how this works out, I might end up having to do this for a couple of clients.
Really?
So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe another one over here.
Maybe. Do you do any generic drug stuff?
We've done some bioequivalency studies at different clinics of mine, yeah.
Yeah, you might need to start looking at that then.
Yeah, I'll have to talk to the appropriate individuals there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Have Darshan given a call.
Yep.
So,
As
yeah,
always.
what do you think about the future of this industry? Are we going to see more and more regulatory stuff, or, I mean, I can't
It's not
imagine
getting.
it's going to get easier.
Yeah, I can't imagine the FDA going, you know what, we've done a good job. We're
Yeah,
gonna stop now.
we've done
Uh,
enough.
I think that there's a whole discussion right now that everyone's been talking about at MAJA and all these conferences about risk-based monitoring, and what is the
Yeah,
impact of risk-based monitoring on clinical trials. The question that was being raised was, are we going to see uh, cheaper cheaper clinical trials? And sponsors who've been dealing with it are coming out and saying, no, we thought it would be cheaper, but it turns out it's not. It's just deeper. So sites that actually need more attention are going to get more attention, and sites that don't won't. But the overall impact is about the same financially, which I thought
I
was
see.
interesting. It surprised me. I thought it would be different.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess the main cost is the man hours or woman hours that they're
Right.
paying for, and getting on an airplane is negligible cost
Yeah, that's not
versus like spending a week at a site, a high enrolling site, right?
exactly.
And
And
sometimes
it's
sending two monitors at one site and then having a project manager review those monitors,
right.
right? So yeah, I agree. Okay, next topic, mergers. There's been a lot of mergers lately in pharma. One
Well,
of them,
mergers and sales. So we should clarify this the distinction.
mergers and acquisitions and hostile takeovers.
Correct.
And I'm not sure which one, but the big one in the news lately is AstraZeneca Pfizer. I think it got kind of hostile towards the end. I think Pfizer
It's
just
fair
said,
to
we're
say
going to
it's
take
sort
you
of
over.
hostile right now.
Yeah, yeah, nice. My favorite type of takeovers, Darshan, are hostile ones. Okay, why have a peaceful takeover? So, how does this, seriously, how do these mergers and acquisitions impact research, and how does it impact CROs? Are we going to see a trickle down effect of CROs merging or acquiring each other?
I'm not sure I'm seeing enough CROs merging. I think, as you said, there is what I like to call the Highlander effect in pharma right now. There can be only one.
Hmm.
So you've got all these pharmaceutical companies all biting to eat each other, and it feels like eventually there's just going to be one big pharmaceutical company. Obviously, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but that's how it feels. Um, there was a question out there that with all these CROs going out there now saying we've got to compete for fewer dollars, will there be a whole set of CROs dying out? And it was interesting. I had these conversations with a few CROs, and one of the things they all said was that we're now all targeting things differently. They're making smarter decisions. Um, the most
Who's
most
making smarter decisions?
CROs and sites.
Ah.
And this was really interesting for me. A few years ago, with the industry used to talk about how everyone was saying we do trials, we do oncology trials, and that was just you could talk to anyone, and they were like, "We're an expert in oncology," because apparently that was the hottest thing since sliced bread.
Mm-hmm.
Then there was orphan disease states. Oh yeah, we do orphan disease state clinical trials. But now what you're starting to see is, um, I spoke to a few sites and they're like, no, we don't do those types of studies. We only do dermatology studies. We only do neurology studies. Sites are getting smarter. They're saying we don't want to go after everything that's out there, which means that um, I think that there might be some level of specialization. So these mergers may not be as problematic as we initially thought. I started asking people, well, what about risk-based monitoring? Are you worried that it's some sites are going to be able to do it, some sites aren't going to be able to do it, are some CROs going to be able to handle it, are other CROs not being able to handle it? So I actually asked one of these questions at Magi, and there were three sponsors on there. Two of them said that in the RFPs that they're doing, they're actually saying that we want you to demonstrate that you can do risk-based monitoring, and we
Mm-hmm.
want you to tell us how you would do that. And in some cases, they said, show us your experience with it, which I thought was interesting because risk-based monitoring is a very new concept.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
brand new.
yeah, so I'm not sure
Maybe
how that's
maybe 2 years old, right?
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe exactly. So asking a CRO to have experience with it is asking a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so unless a sponsor that's already existed has changed their plan, which is unlikely right now, most CROs won't have that much experience with it. Give it time, that might change. But what gets interesting to me is CROs work off of a very thin margin. So the question to ask is, if
Yes.
CROs are working off a thin margin, they don't have the time to retrain these sites.
Right.
Retrain their CRAs. So if they don't have time to retrain sites, retrain CRAs, how is this going to happen then? So I asked
Yeah.
that question, and they don't really have an answer for that. The answer that sort of came out was the CROs that don't invest will just die out. So it's very much looking like evolution in the
So
sense
the
that
sites that won't invest in what? In
training their training that forces their individuals and the investigators in risk-based monitoring and risk-based trials.
So
Uh,
essentially, that just means entering data faster.
Basically,
That's what it
quite
means.
possibly, but it
Yeah.
also may be not just entering that data faster; it's also having the right data and making sure that the right data is reported. Because with risk-based monitoring comes centralized monitoring,
Hmm.
because everyone's talking about that as well. So there are more and more vendors talking about how they're going to provide centralized monitoring, and they're providing an all e-based solution, all electronics-based solution to risk-based monitoring and centralized monitoring. So how is that all going to play out? Um, I think those are the new trends that you may want to keep an eye out for. If
I
you're
definitely will. I plan to buy the Clippers, and I need to be on top of this. So centralized monitoring, how does that differ from from risk-based monitoring?
well, centralized monitoring is you don't actually have to send as many people, as many CRAs to the site itself.
Oh,
Risk-based
okay.
monitoring is about choosing sites. Centralized monitoring is about where you actually conduct the audit from.
So they're both about dedicating resources to specific uh, places rather than just throwing resources everywhere.
Well, exactly. Well, centralized monitoring is saying we want to see trends. The FDA is saying we don't care as much about every single site out there as much as what are the sites that need interest. What are the trends that you should be seeing? That because you're looking at the forest, looking at the trees, you're missing the forest. So
Hmm.
we want you to
Hmm.
collect the data and start reporting to us intelligently.
Yeah.
So that's the new.
Hypothetically speaking here, and I'm going to ask you to be a futurist, Nostradamus, right?
Yes.
Darshan, amongst your other titles. You can be fortune teller.
Okay.
I'm noticing that these EDC companies,
Yeah.
um, their role is going to be increasingly important
Yeah.
as this real-time data uh, thing is going to be at the forefront of basically what the risk-based monitoring and centralized monitoring are trying to get to, right? They're at the core of the issue. So, do you see these ECRF companies um, being acquired by CROs?
Hmm. I'm not sure ECRF companies will necessarily be acquired as it's going to be a couple of different things. Some may be acquired, some will die out, and
Right.
some will basically get reborn. So some CROs, I would imagine, would say, "We'll just develop it internally. Why do I need to buy another company? It's not like you provide me with uh,
Because
extra
some do
resources."
a very good job.
Absolutely, but the question is, if you buy out a EDC,
Mm-hmm.
usually you buy them out for their customer database. If you are a CRO, you don't want to actually provide the services to your competitors. So why would
I
you need
see.
their customer database? You're just looking for the technology, in which case, unless they have patents that prevent you from practicing something,
Unless
you
you
don't
do
need
want
it.
to let your competitors use their services but charge them a premium for it.
You might. There might be some legal issues with that, but I don't know too many companies that would say, "Oh yeah, let me provide you with services that without which you can't do your job."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So your smaller CROs may have problems coming in the
Yeah.
future, while your
Yeah.
larger ones will all thrive. But the question is, again, it's another discussion I've been having with a couple of different sites. With fair market value becoming what it is,
Mm.
and profit margins being cut as drastically as they are, is there that much profit in clinical trials? The larger you are as a company, the smaller your profit margin.
Yep. Yep. And I can attest to this. Before, earlier we spoke about CROs and how their profit margins are slim. I used to think that that was a myth. I used to think that they were just extorting the sites, and the CROs got most of the money. And earlier, a few months ago, I got my hands on a budget from a CRO to a sponsor. They sent me the wrong one. All right, and I didn't publish it or anything, but I talked about it, and it was very, very close to what we negotiated. So I see that they really do have slim margins, at
Yeah,
least this particular CRO, but anecdotal evidence.
absolutely. I mean, I've worked for CROs, I've worked with CROs, and they work off of very, very tight margins. They can't be too pricey because if they were, the competitor would take their work
Even
away.
the big ones like Quintiles.
Even the big ones like quintiles. But here's the interesting thing, and I think you and I have had this discussion. The big ones like quintiles are now saying, you know what, we don't want to play the same game because we will lose if we have to keep competing on price. So
Right.
what we'll do is develop partnerships with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what you're seeing is CRO saying we'll cover our costs, but we'll make the margin from the product itself. So there may be a really good upside
Mm-hmm.
compared to a really good down compared to just thin margins.
Yeah, they're even getting involved on the sales end. Once the drug is approved, they
Exactly.
have training programs for the sales. Excellent. All right, last one. Uh, last topic, because this has actually been a good podcast. FCPA. What can you tell us?
Okay, so the FCPA, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, we talked a few seconds ago about fair market value, and we talked about um, how people are saying that fair market value is cutting into their profits. Well, that becomes even more problematic when you're doing studies globally. If you're doing a study globally, and let's say certain countries say that, like I've heard that in Japan, for example, if you want to get your drug approved, you have to have certain doctors doing your studies. They are part of the entire drug approval process in Japan, and that's just the way they do business.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, if you have to have these doctors on your as PI or whatever it is that you're going to do, they need to be paid. They need to be incorporated into your studies. Well, are they being paid appropriately? Are they being chosen appropriately? How much are they being paid? Some numbers might be seen as offensive, but now with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which requires that you only pay these people fair market value, that might become problematic. Well, the big question to ask is, well, how does that apply to clinical trials? The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act makes it illegal to bribe governments. The problem is in many countries, like Europe, for example, with government sponsored. Well, the government does healthcare, so your doctors technically work for the government.
Right.
So that becomes problematic from that perspective, where you're saying, okay, am I bribing a doctor to do this clinical research? And fair
Mm-hmm.
market value becomes more and more important. There have been several, I believe Biomet, I believe the big one I'm trying to keep till the end, but uh, two major medical device companies, and then the biggest ones have been GSK. GSK was convicted, well, not convicted actually, they're being investigated under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in, let's see, China, where the person's been, I understand, in jail or under house arrest for over a year. Poland, I want to say Nigeria. Uh, India has had its own issues with corruption,
Oh,
uh,
to say the least.
to say the least. um, but the point here is it's playing a major role. I know China, for example, they had a big issue where these investigators were taken out for lunch or dinner under saying it was a site initiation visit. We'll talk to you about that. But it was deemed to be misclassified, and that was deemed to be a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So how you take your physicians out for lunch, is it supposed to be promotional, or is it supposed to be influential, or is it supposed to be clinical research? You need to be crystal clear about how you're choosing these you're choosing these criteria. So that's going to become more and more important. It's already pretty important. The first wave a few years ago was False Claims Act, anti-kickback work. That died down a little bit. Then you had Park Doctrine pick up a little bit, and now you're seeing the rise of Foreign Corrupt Practices Act stuff. And most what are called OECD nations have their own version of this. So the UK Anti-Bribery Act is pretty big out there as well.
Mm.
Uh, and what you're going to get now is a treasure trove of information because of the different countries having their own version of the Physician Payment Sunshine Act. So each country has their own version. So they're going, not each, but many countries have their own versions. So you're going to get different versions of it coming out. And different countries are going to disclose how much you're paying doctors. And someone's going to data mine this and say, well, is that too much? Is that appropriate?
Oh, of course. You're gonna have many people doing that.
Yeah.
Uh, nice, man. I gotta say, this has been a very content-rich podcast. We've covered a lot of different topics, and I think we did it pretty good, man.
Succinctly.
Yeah, we answered a lot of people's questions. I condensed a lot of viewer questions into this. I saved a lot for this particular podcast, so we got a lot of those out of the way. Anything else going on with you, sir?
No, I think we've covered a lot of them. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation. There's always new stuff to talk about, and we added some topics more than we discussed. Talked about risk-based monitoring and
Yeah.
centralized monitoring. So it should have been a good talk. And if people have questions, they would know where to reach you and me.
Yeah, and
Uh,
this is like one of those podcasts where if you're running a research clinic or even a CRO, you can kind of pay attention to and see some of these trends coming up and see how you can be proactive with your organization. So thank you, Darshan. Thanks to the Guru producers, South Coast Clinical Trials, Sarah Elizabeth Siegler, Resolve Research Solutions, Accurate Clinical Trials, PTNR, Erdhart Clinical Research, Tradestone LLC, Breakthrough Clinical Trials, Kulkarni Law Firm, Biopharm Systems, Zymware, Mozio, St. Paul Medical Research Center, Investigator Research Group, Phlebotomy Services, and there's been a few new ones I haven't added yet. Thank you guys. I'm only accepting 100 of these, by the way. 100 producers, $99, a lifetime membership. I think it's not bad. A lifetime. Come
I
on.
agree.
So thank you, Darshan.
Thank you.
We'll talk more. And thank you guys for watching. This is Dan and Darshan from theclinicaltrialsguru.com. Take care.